So, you want to buy a super yacht, your own floating palace, crew at your service, anchored wherever you please. Here's the part nobody tells you. The purchase price is, by a wide margin, the cheapest part of owning one. And unlike almost every other asset we've covered on this channel, the bill doesn't slow down even when the yacht never leaves the dock. That's not a contradiction. That's the whole business. And once you understand the one rule that governs it, you'll never look at a super yacht in a harbor the same way again. Let's start with what it actually costs to buy one, because the range is enormous. A new build in the 20 to 30 meter range can run somewhere between $2 and $5 million. Step up to a mid-sized 40 to 50 meter yacht, the kind that requires a full professional crew, and you're looking at tens of millions of dollars before you've added a single custom finish. At the very top of the market, a 70-meter-plus super yacht can exceed $100 million, and the largest, most elaborate vessels on the planet have sold for several hundred million. That number is the headline. It is, in almost every case, the smallest number you will ever write a check for in this business. Here's the industry's own rule of thumb, and it's one every serious buyer eventually has to accept. It's called the 10% rule, and it states that annual operating costs will run somewhere around 10% of what you paid for the yacht every single year for as long as you own it. In practice, the real number tends to run higher, somewhere between 12 and 15% for a typical 40 to 50 meter yacht in regular private use, and can climb past 15% for larger vessels, older vessels, or yachts used heavily for long-range cruising. On a 50-meter new-build motor yacht, that works out to somewhere between $4 and $6 million a year, just to keep the vessel running before you've factored in financing costs or the yacht's own depreciation. So where does that money actually go? The single largest line item by a wide margin is crew, typically 30 to 40% of your total annual operating cost, and it only grows as the yacht gets bigger. A fully crewed 40-meter yacht with 8 to 10 crew members runs somewhere between $500,000 and $700,000 a year in total crew costs, once you include salaries, benefits, training, travel, and provisioning. Move up to a 60-meter yacht with 14 to 18 crew, and that figure climbs to somewhere between $1.2 and $1.8 million annually. A captain alone on a 50-meter vessel earns somewhere between $120,000 and $192,000 a year in base salary. On an 80-meter vessel, that same captain earns closer to $200,000 to $275,000. And unlike almost every other expense on this list, crew costs don't meaningfully shrink if you use the yacht less. You still need a full qualified crew on board and paid, whether you visit the vessel for 3 months a year or 3 weeks. The second major cost category is maintenance, typically 14 to 18% of your annual operating budget. On a $20 million vessel, that's $250,000 to $400,000 in a completely normal year, covering engine servicing, hull cleaning, electronics, safety equipment certification, and the constant small repairs that come with running complex machinery continuously in salt water. And that's before you get to the refit cycle. Most super yachts require a dry dock period every few years for work that can't be done in the water at all, hull repaints, running gear inspections, deeper mechanical access, and a major refit on a 50-meter vessel can spike costs to somewhere between $2 and $5 million in that single year alone. Then there's insurance, typically 10 to 14% of your annual operating cost, covering hull and machinery damage, third-party liability, and crew protection. Berthing and marina fees add another 8 to 12%, and in prime locations, this gets genuinely aggressive. During peak season, a large yacht can pay somewhere between $1,000 and $5,000 a night just to dock, which adds up to as much as $300,000 a year in dockage alone before you've moved the boat an inch. Fuel adds another 8 to 12%, higher if the yacht is actively cruising rather than sitting still, since a 50-meter displacement yacht can burn roughly 500 liters of fuel an hour at cruising speed. Here's the detail that catches almost every first-time buyer off guard, and it's the reason the 10% rule has become something of a punchline among experienced brokers. Research across the industry consistently shows that first-time buyers underestimate their true annual operating budget by 30 to 50%. Within 18 to 24 months of taking delivery, a meaningful share of new owners find themselves in real financial strain, not because the yacht itself was unaffordable, but because nobody ever laid out the true annual cost clearly before they signed. And notice what none of these categories include. Financing costs on the purchase itself aren't in that 10 to 15% figure. Neither is depreciation, and superyacht depreciation is genuinely steep. A new yacht can lose a significant share of its value within the first few years alone, meaning the asset sitting at your private dock is quietly losing money in a second, completely separate way from the operating costs you're paying to maintain it. Now, here's what makes this genuinely different from almost every other asset we've covered on this channel. With an airport, a mall, a casino, even an oil refinery, the fixed costs at least buy you the possibility of revenue. Passengers still land, shoppers still walk through the door. A superyacht sitting idle at a private dock generates exactly zero revenue while every single cost category we just walked through keeps running in the background, uninterrupted, whether a single guest ever steps on board or not. There's a story that illustrates this more starkly than almost any other example in the entire yachting industry, and it doesn't even involve a yacht that's currently being used at all. In 2022, a 348-foot superyacht called the Amadea, built by the German yard Lürsen and valued at approximately $325 million, was seized by a U.S.-led task force in Fiji as part of a broader effort targeting the assets of sanctioned individuals following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The vessel was towed to San Diego and placed in the custody of the U.S. Marshals Service, where it has remained, essentially motionless, ever since. Here's the part that matters for understanding the economics of this asset class specifically. The Amadea has 8 staterooms, a helipad, an infinity pool, 2 elevators, and can accommodate 36 crew members. None of that has been used for a single day since the seizure. No charter guests, no private cruising. The yacht has simply sat, first in Fiji, then transported across the Pacific, then docked in California. And according to court filings, the federal government incurred approximately $32 million in costs tied to maintenance, storage, and transportation of the vessel during that period. $32 million spent keeping a yacht that nobody has used for a single day from deteriorating at the dock. That number alone is larger than what most entire superyachts cost to purchase outright. It exists purely as the cost of keeping a very large, very complex machine from falling apart while sitting completely still. That's the structural lesson hiding inside an otherwise unusual legal story. It doesn't matter who owns the yacht, why it's sitting idle, or under what circumstances. The hull still needs to be maintained. The systems still need periodic attention. Storage and dockage fees accrue regardless of activity. A superyacht is one of the only major asset classes where doing absolutely nothing with it still generates a multi-million-dollar annual bill because the machine itself demands constant upkeep independent of whether it's ever put. Now compare that to the rare exception in this industry, the handful of owners who've actually found a way to make the math work in their favor. For most of yachting history, the idea of a superyacht turning an actual profit through charter was considered close to a fantasy. Liz Cox, a yacht broker with more than 3 decades in the business, has described the first time she heard of it actually happening, in the early 2000s, involving a yacht called Leander G. After the owner had enjoyed the vessel privately, he put it on the charter market with the explicit intention of making money, not just offsetting costs, actually turning a profit. At the time, brokers in the industry treated this as close to unheard of. Today, it's still rare, but it's no longer unheard of, and the mechanics of how it works are instructive. A well-located, well-managed 48-meter motor yacht operating primarily in the Western Mediterranean can command weekly charter rates as high as 250,000 to 310,000 euros during peak summer season. Run the numbers on a yacht like that across 7 weeks of high-season charter, and the gross revenue can come close to matching the vessel's entire annual operating cost. In one real documented example, a yacht of this profile generated just enough charter revenue in a season to produce a slight profit on the order of 17,000 euros after covering crew, maintenance, insurance, and dockage for the entire year. Modest as that number sounds relative to the scale of the vessel, Industry professionals describe it as genuinely rare, a demonstration that breaking even, let alone turning a profit, is possible only under a very specific set of conditions. Here's what those conditions actually require, and it explains why almost nobody manages to replicate it. The owner has to genuinely prioritize charter over personal use, reserving the yacht's most valuable weeks, the highest demand windows in the Mediterranean or Caribbean season, for paying guests rather than family vacations. The yacht itself has to be new enough, or well-maintained enough, to command premium rates and avoid the unscheduled repair costs that eat directly into a thin margin. The crew has to be selected and managed with a genuinely commercial mindset rather than a purely hospitality-focused one. And even then, industry professionals are candid that a profitable charter superyacht remains what one veteran manager called a unicorn, more attainable than it used to be, but still very much the exception rather than the rule. The difference between the Amadeus sitting idle in San Diego and a yacht like Leander G generating real charter income wasn't the size of the vessel or the wealth of the owner. It was activity, and specifically, a deliberate, commercially minded decision to treat the yacht's calendar as an asset to be filled rather than a luxury to be reserved. Every week, a yacht sits at the dock, fully crewed and fully insured, generating zero revenue, is a week where the fixed costs we walked through earlier accrue with absolutely nothing offsetting them. Every week that same yacht is out on a paying charter is a week where at least some of those identical costs get covered by someone else entirely. That brings us to the structural risk sitting underneath this entire asset class. And it isn't damage, and it isn't a market downturn. It's the complete absence of any natural offset to the yacht's fixed costs. An airport has captive airline traffic. A shopping mall has anchor tenants paying rent regardless of foot traffic that day. A casino has a house edge working in its favor on every single hand. A superyacht sitting at a private dock has none of that. It has only the relentless, unchanging bill for crew, insurance, dockage, and maintenance, arriving every month with total indifference to whether the vessel has moved an inch. Zoom out across the entire industry, and the pattern becomes obvious. The yacht owners who come closest to making the economics work are almost never the ones who bought purely for private enjoyment and hoped the costs would sort themselves out. They're the rare few who treat the vessel with genuine commercial discipline, filling the calendar, prioritizing revenue-generating weeks, and accepting that the yacht is, in financial terms, closer to a small hospitality business than a private toy. The owners for whom the economics work out worst are the ones who let the yacht sit largely idle, paying the full 10 to 15% every single year regardless. The exact dynamic that turned the Amadeus 3 years of enforced stillness into a $32 million bill for doing absolutely nothing at all. So does owning a superyacht actually work as a financial asset? The honest answer is that for almost everyone who buys one, it was never supposed to. In the optimistic version, an owner with real commercial discipline books a strong charter season in a premium location, offsets a meaningful share, sometimes even all, of the annual operating cost, and enjoys a genuinely rare outcome in this industry: ownership that doesn't quietly bleed money every single year it exists. In the realistic version, which describes the overwhelming majority of owners, the yacht sits at the dock more often than it sails, the crew gets paid regardless. The insurance premium comes due regardless, and 10 to 15% of the purchase price disappears every single year in exchange for weeks, sometimes only days, of actual personal use. Neither outcome has much to do with how impressive the yacht looks in the harbor. A superyacht was never really a financial asset in the way an airport or a shopping mall is. It's one of the only purchases in this entire category where the buyer going in already knows the yacht will never pay for itself and buys it anyway, because the actual product being purchased was never the boat. It was the ability to step onto it whenever they wanted and have the entire rest of the world's costs of admission simply not apply.